figuring out how to spend my time. If I don't, then I may lose my fucking mind. We got Narendra Modi in the Oligarch Valley in California. Georgia. Georgia, where's your borns, ya? You got The Walking Dead in California. You don't got Los Angeles Boras. Oh, you got those Vatos in California. Oh, no! Nevada would go that way that the Badlands would, that Theodore Roosevelt would judge. When he got the Yellowstone Park out of his cousins trying to get clout in FDR's Dust Bowl. He got socialism for those fools, and he got them fouls, and he got content out and proud. Yeah, Yellowstone rants. Yellowstone rants. Yellowstone rants. Try to prance. We got the Stonewall riots. Don't buy shit. Don't buy shit. Patty Hearst tried to get reimbursed by that guy Halliday. He got pugilist tendencies. Try to get in my trinity. Try to get in the trenches. See, because he got those pugilist tendencies. He's the anarchist generation born after the people got them faces melted off. Because they had to scoff. Because everybody was born before the 1876s. They got hair, they got big dicks. Woodrow Wilson born in them sis. He was such a Sam. I don't got no sympathy for anybody who wants to be such a bore, who would want to retail anything that is not some see-through sea sales in the seashore, killing pangolins more so. Because you want to be so fucking vile that you got the farmers and the crocodiles. You won't ban the wet farms that you wanted to. You won't ban the wet farms that you wanted to. Wet markets and iron hobbyists that you don't got to get a little bliss. Wasting the economies to fit into industrialist molds. They got them polluting the environment more. This is my guitar. The Oligarch Valley in California. As you know that West California, or coastal California, is where most of California's population is. But it's Chinatown, Drake, so there's this guy, Yasha Levine. He wrote for Pando, a lot of these articles. Now he writes for something called Immigrants as Warfare. Immigration as Warfare. Is this? Oh, this is plugged in. I read this one article that was like, post even World War II, we were already having this refugee crisis shit. People act as though like, oh yeah, it wasn't different in World War II, but then plenty of the U.S. was anti-Semitic and they weren't letting Jews in. And there were plenty of conditions where there were like Eastern Europeans led into Germans' houses, along the lines of, fuck you, Germans, regarding the, what in the U.S. is known as the thing that doesn't let soldiers board in your house, which is reasonable because they're Nazis. But then meanwhile, the Jews were held in, barely better situations than they were in before, during the Holocaust. Of course, it's not intentional, but too often people can sort of think of it like, oh, yeah, I'll share the article in the description, but you have to have bad intentions for some reason to, like, have things go to shit. Well, this is obviously not the case. There were concentration camps during the Boer War. You know, the Columbus. You know, he probably wasn't thinking, I'm going to give a bunch of Indian smallpox. I mean, for sure, he was, pro enslavement of the population. That didn't work out because they all died. It worked a bit better with the, Africans. Is that plugged in? There's a lot of history to this country. The U.S. imported after World War II a bunch of Nazis to be in the space program. Who's that? Goddard. That fucking the fake machine dog and Jimmy Neutron is named after him. I think he was a Nazi. A lot of those people were Nazis, and yet we're sort of we by the bystander effect, hook, line, and sinker, and we're sort of now suddenly the Nazis, that was not even a real war, according to whatever person said that in the article, but now the Soviets are the real war. So you see that, much more valuable than, getting the hegemony of, the first world is to prevent these sort of competition that between the first and second world for the third world, basically. And so that's where a lot of, post-World War II, similar to the Black Plague, I don't really know any of this, but basically, every nation was bankrupt and they couldn't really fight for, Africa, South Asia, the Pacific region. I was made to hit an American. And the question is, to me, what interest do I get from this? I don't know. I feel like it just illustrates some stuff, so you can use it to a certain extent, sort of, a bit, sarcastically. I don't know if that's the exact right word, but you're not being sort of emotional about the situation. Because at a certain point, that sort of pessimistic attitude is well, do you think anything has ever been different? I mean, fuck, dude. It's just the feudalism that existed before, Enlightenment or whatever, before colonialism, before the Black Plague and the sort of Protestant Catholic divide, before mercantilism, that's just been sort of expropriated so that instead of the wealth being in the landowners, it's in the fucking merchants and the wealthy sort of patrons for those merchants, making laws around that. So instead of a bunch of governments, you have this sort of, it's still a bunch of governments, but they're more in a sort of harmony. Although definitely a twisted harmony. It's still you don't have everybody fighting against each other, you know? By then, you had alliances. By after Napoleon, everyone was like, okay, now we realize that nationalism can't be used anymore for your individual nation's interests. You have to go into like factions and shit. And that's what World War I and World War II were over, was to break down nationalism as a centering of powers. And the post-World War II era gave birth to like a neoliberalism, which basically means the dissolution of any newfound popular sovereignty and the deferment of like law surrounding corporations to corporate tribunals or whatever, like in the trade deals where it says like, you know, you can't have a sovereignty, you can't have laws which hurt the stockholders in such and such companies. So suddenly, instead of you needing patrons for your mercantile business, instead, the government needs these sort of hype makers for their own sort of sovereignty, with punishment, you know, on the other side of the bend. Boop, 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 boop. Yeah! Boop, boop. You know, is this like revelatory history? No, I don't think so. Everything is just fucked. Do you learn anything from this? No, I don't think so. Everything is just fucked. Boop, 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 boop. Yeah! I tried to be the best that I ever could. Centuries that you could have never contemplated the job a piece of wood. Yeah! You didn't really find that I was ripping off songs that was already made before. Already made before. Yeah! I tried to tell you things are good. Shouldn't have any hope for some sort of normalcy. So that's the story about presidency ever since Woodrow Wilson or Theodore Roosevelt, and that's why things are fucked. And this is an album now. You know, the drug war, it started in the 60s or whatever. Or at least post-FDR, when the anarchists and the communists were put down. You know, FDR wasn't the best president, he was just the best president. Woodrow Wilson had this sort of, you know, revival of sedition laws and bullshit that got rid of newspapers, put people in jail. And that's the only merit you can give to, like, the 3 Republican presidents that came after him. For real. Like, what was that? Hoover, Coolidge, and Harding? They were all cronies. But, you know, it's not like a criticism of, like, the Republican Party. It's just what the Republican Party was becoming at the time. And each party sort of didn't have any way to distinguish itself because the sovereignty of black people was just extinguished after 1876. And corporations were gaining more and more political power by then, so that even with the progressive era and trust-busting tactics, you could still have, you know, corporations though they might not have all purveying power over the markets, and while they might be regulated to a degree among their workers in certain parts, they can still sort of like break down any dissidence regarding unfair remuneration to their workers, which you see in the violent strike takedowns in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And cynically, too, in the early 1900s, you have, of course, Woodrow Wilson's sedition shit, and then you also have the race riots. Racial tensions were revived by Woodrow Wilson, who screened Birth of a Nation in the White House. They were revived by, who else? I guess just the American nation. God bless America! And also revived by, you know, why did the race riot start in like 19 post World War I years? A bunch of people back from the war competing for labor, and the over-speculative fake economy after that, which was built largely on war profiteers, which the Republican Party had become after that, after the Civil War. Yeah! Is this like a redoubling of a video I've already done, or is it like an original video? Of course it's not an original video, because I'm just respouting what I've heard. I'm not making any like new conclusions. Maybe I am, but the new conclusions aren't at all very revelatory. They're not really getting anything across. It's just more stress and more stress and more stress. It's like the problem with like sort of nascent hope largely is that you can't really like let it breathe. Because for instance, there was a lot of that after the Depression, and that only lasted like 40 years until a lot of privatization happened and a bunch of stuff that it's hard to even sort of like directly say like why it's bad. It's just a sort of carpetbagging tactic. The history of the world is found and bound. And though in the 20s the urban centers were hollowed out, by the 60s immigration practices increased suburbanization. Let them cut the cord. Noided. 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 You know that the sanctions on Iran largely exist just because some like people in California want to keep selling you pistachios? Some real shit. And Israel still buys their pistachios. Israel is in bed with Iran. They want to buy the pistachios. Don't you want Israelis to buy your pistachios? Don't you want Israelis to buy your pistachios? Don't you want Israelis to love them get pistachios? The suburbs. It's all like a card trick. Because sort of if a group of people is already on the downturn, people don't really mind if you fuck them over even harder. And if you wedge in a fake economy centered around paper water, and if you own literally all the water on Earth, that makes sense. If you own even the water on Earth that doesn't currently exist, that also makes sense. It makes a lot of sense that you own water that doesn't exist, and that you sell water that doesn't exist, and that you can get money back from the government to say that, you know, like, that water that doesn't exist, you didn't give us that water, so we're gonna feed you like billions of dollars. I don't even know if that's how it works. I might be I might be just like being an angry lib, you know, like an angry leftist who like doesn't even know facts. But I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Is that like basically like paper water? They can. It's bullshit. Like why do you own fucking water? Water? It's water. It's water. California used to be the Chinese, and they do heroin, they work on the railroads till they were on their knees. Then came the Japanese, at least to my knowledge they probably were after, then they were interned by the FDR, and they didn't like that, that's why they go far. There was Mike Honda, who was replaced by Rokanda, who was a bit more for Narendra Modi, to my knowledge. I don't really know. There was also Lily Singh, who was also kind of for, but he was a Republican, which wouldn't work in the Bay, which is so liberal because they have Google spying on your asshole. Oh my asshole, I got Apple in San Fernando Valley. That's where they made that movie about the magnolia that is more like a Mississippi plant. This video is shit. This video is shit. This video is shit. The whole thing I think 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 is shit. So, is that educational? Like, is that mildly, at least, a sort of coherent narrative? I don't know. The U.S. Subscribe.